All right. Well, hi, hello, and welcome to Operationalizing Zero Trust Strategies and Best Practices for Government Agencies. Now, today's webinar is sponsored by Gigamon and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, a future B2B company, and I am so happy that I get to be your moderator for this extremely interesting conversation because I love zero trust. You've all heard me say this before. I love the strategy. I love the concept of it. I find this aspect so interesting and layered when we're combining human elements with technical ones. But how do we go beyond the theory and actually operationalize these ideas in our organization? I mean, that's the key step, right? We can talk about it all day long, and boy, I would love to do that, but putting these great ideas into action successfully. And that's what we're going to talk about today. With the help of a leading thought expert from Gigamon, we will review the implementation of the Department of Defense Zero Trust model. We're going to explore the best practices from the NSA and outline how you can effectively operationalize zero trust principles in your organization in both a timely and a budget-conscious way. All this great insight and more coming at us very quickly. But first, I'm going to zip through a few important housekeeping points, and then we can get this show on the road. So let's start out with a little tour of your audience console. As always, make sure you're all nice and settled and ready for our wonderful webinar today. We're going to start out in the questions section. Now, this is the best place to get interactive, get involved, and ask questions of our expert presenter. He definitely wants to hear from you, so make sure you're getting those questions in. I see some of you already using this. Hey, Morteza. Hey, Melissa, John, Aaron. I saw Gilbert and Ali. I saw Rakesh here. We've got Chris. We've got a whole awesome crew. Keep those highs and hellos coming in. I want to know how you're doing. I want to know where you're chiming in from, and we want to hear from you as we go through our day together today. Get those questions in. Now, that questions window is also where you can reach out to our team if you are having any technical issues. Knock on wood. Hopefully that doesn't come up. But if a little gremlin gets in the system, here's your first step. Step one, browser refresh. Browser refresh is going to clear out most of the usual gremlins, but I get it. Sometimes they're very clingy, and if that browser refresh does not work, you can post a message right there in the questions window, and our crew will be there to help you out. So let us know. All right, so we started in the questions window. Take one quick hop on over to the handouts tab. Now that handouts tab, if you haven't already looked around in there, is absolutely full of cool resources and takeaways that you are going to want to explore once we wrap our webinar. So we're going to get a lot of great insight and information today. Your brain is going to feel totally full and overloaded up to the brim with cool insight, and you are going to want to remind yourself of all those cool insights and explore a little further, and those handouts are the way to do it. So make sure you have opened those handouts, hold on to them, save those for later. Don't read them just yet because we've got a whole webinar in front of us. But once we wrap up, come back to those. All right, so questions, handouts, let's talk about prizes. We do have a few prizes for you. There's a $250 Amazon gift card that we'll be giving away at the end of our webinar. Now, you do need to be here in live attendance during the webinar in order to qualify to win that prize, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you are not sure what those T's and C's are, no problem. We've got them linked for you in the handouts tab, so you can just head back on over, click in, scroll down, and you will find them all waiting for you there. All right, now, speaking of prizes, I said we have a few prizes for you today. We also do have the best question gift card for all of you. That's a $50 Amazon gift card that's going to go to the best question asked in our webinar today. So we are saving a whole bunch of time for Q&A. We're wanting to get interactive and chat with all of you at the end of our session today. We're going to try to get through as many questions as we can. Even if we don't get to your question in our live session, you are still entered to win that best question gift card just by asking that question. So make sure you get that question in. We're going to review all of them after we wrap, and then we'll follow up with that best question gift card winner. All right, well, that was it for the housekeeping information. I told you we'd keep it short and sweet. We're ready to rock. We're ready to get our wonderful expert presenter on out here with me. We're going to go through a very exciting presentation, and then we're going to have an even more exciting conversation at the end. So stay tuned. Lots of cool stuff coming your way. And as you can see, we have an incredible expert guide here with us to take us through this whole wonderful journey today. I'm very happy to introduce you all to our speaker here with us from the Gigamon team, Stephen Goudreau, Cloud Security Evangelist. Stephen, I know you have a lot of great insight and information in store for us. I think we should probably get things rolling. I'm going to hand things right on over to you. Take it away.
Hello, my name is Stephen Goudreau. I'm the Cloud Security Evangelist here at Gigamon, and we're going to discuss Zero Trust and the Department of Defense. So the very first thing we want to talk about is it even possible? Because it's a very challenging framework, and there's a lot of operational and tactical challenges. Now, on the high level, from the executive level, zero trust makes complete sense once you understand it. However, the problem we have is on the tactical side of things. Once we understand we need to do it, the architects and the practitioners go, okay, what tactically does this mean? What do I do? So the first thing we want to talk about is it even possible? And it turns out that it is. The US Navy has successfully done a zero trust model in October of this year. We don't know much about it other than it passed the prerequisite testing and red teaming. We do know that it was all in Azure. We don't know if it was all cloud native or Azure provided tools or if there were other tools involved. It was a green field deployment. Um, and cost was not a factor. Now, I attribute this a bit to like the Wright brothers. The first time they flew, they proved that it was possible. However, I expect there to be many, many iterations once we fully understand. Also, I'm pretty sure it's really, really expensive. Now, on the greenfield side of things, now that we've conceptually shown it can be done, that's probably not going to work for most existing organizations since they're not greenfield and they have to deal with a lot of legacy systems and compute. So at least we know it's possible. Now, zero trust, we're going to talk about the Department of Defense framework, right? It's basically the mother of all security frameworks. The reason for that is it's a more mature model. It has 152 controls or activities with big, long descriptions, tactical descriptions as to what you're trying to accomplish. And some ideas of how to go about doing that. Some of the other models, particularly the CISA model, doesn't have that level of depth. Also, I would expect there to potentially be some discontinuity with how they may change up some of the federal agencies, so that particular model may fall further behind. Now, zero trust isn't a one size fits all, and most organizations are going to have to pick and choose what to start with. It's often very aspirational, but as we've said before, so what does it mean? How do I even start? And we're going to talk a little bit about that further in the presentation. And of course, be aware of any vendor that says they do it all. That's just not the case. Now, they may do satisfy a complete aspect of it. But there's other things, particularly around IoT and legacy compute, that are often not thought about that are critical. So we're going to look at the Navy's core principles in zero trust. This is found on their webpage. And again, we're just kind of setting the tone because you have to have a framework to do zero trust. You can't just put zero trust on, say, a firewall upgrade or some identity management. You've got to move with purpose. So here are some of the Navy's guiding principles, right? So continuous verification. If something's online, user, compute, resource, it's continually being verified and authenticated. When you have a piece of compute or a user or a device, it can't freely roam through the entire enterprise or network. It's segmented to where it needs to talk to. So microsegmentation, there's a number of ways to do this. I know there's some top-down solutions with identity that verify your identity and make sure you can only talk to the services and machines you're supposed to. Perfectly reasonable and valid solution. However, that doesn't work with IoT or OT or other legacy kinds of compute that don't understand or care about your identity. So there's going to be a network level aspect where you limit how far devices can speak on the network. You should also operate under the assumption of breach. I personally am doing that for a long time. It's not a question of have the bad guys gotten access. It's how deep are they and how long have they been there? We live in a very different world today than what we did, say, maybe 10 years ago. We are in an active state of conflict, and we have state level threat actors that are funding groups. And all they do is they sit and look for these 0 days of vulnerabilities, and they compile a big list, and then they have a big list ready to go when they need to strike. Additionally, a lot of the things that you see in these breaches, they're just using standard applications and protocols. So you got to kind of have a top-down and a bottom-up view of what's going on, because you can't secure what you can't see. So zero trust activity mapping. Let's talk about the DoD model here. This is their fan chart that they've built. You start at the left, and you work to the right. The further right you get, the more advanced the control is. They have it broken up into 7 pillars. Now, you don't. You're not meant to read this per se. You're just supposed to know that it exists, and you can come look at it later on. Now, as you see, we've got visibility analytics and network and environment, application workload, users. And again, this is why I say no one solution or vendor can do it all, unless you're in some kind of walled garden where you can control it all. But that, again, seems unrealistic for most real world deployments. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've gone ahead and mapped Gigamon's controls to this chart. Now, this mapping is going to grow over time as our understanding of some of the controls and activities evolve. However, what I want the takeaway here is not that I'm trying to sell you on zero trust. What I'm trying to show you is what we do, and more importantly, what we don't do. And this is a mapping that I would ask all of your vendors to do. It's an at-a-glance MITRE style mapping, because you're going to spend a lot of time, with a vendor who says they do it all, and 3 months in, you'll realize there's big gaps. Well, to achieve the trusted advisor state, I want to be perfectly clear with what we do and what we don't do. And I feel that's very, very important. So on the Department of Defense Zero Trust Reference Architecture 2.0, we have that mapping available online for you. Here is a count. We currently address 56 controls or activities, as they're also referred to, just to give you some idea of what we do. And I've written, a 29-page white paper, I believe, where we step through each and every control, what we do, how we solve for it. And that starts to bridge the gap between the we need to do it versus the how do we start. So I want to talk a little bit about understanding some of the solutions from an architectural standpoint, because there's a lot of good, valid solutions out there that do different things. And I want to talk a little bit about an area that I feel is underserved, and that's visibility on the network. So now there's a lot of top-down solutions, right? And by top-down, I mean top-down security controls, what processes is running on your workload, anything that runs at layer 7 would be a top-down solution. User limitations, restrictions, machine IDs, and things like that. What processes, if there's like an EDR agent, I would consider that a top-down solution. But we need a bottom-up visibility and telemetry as well, because once you have a misconfigured or compromised machine that isn't running some of that top-down security, for example, an EDR that was compromised, well, what's watching that workload now, right? Or OT or IoT. You can't put an EDR agent on your printer. A lot of bad guys like to live in printers because they have compute, they have disk space, they have operating system. They're probably owned by the building and not InfoSec or IT. So who knows the last time they've been updated or if there's even patches on them. So this bottom-up view of network telemetry that we can solve for is crucially important. Part of it that is, I think, my old network engineering background, start at the bottom and work your way up. Because if you have a gap at the bottom, you'll never see it at the top. And that's why we keep having just rinse and repeat of a lot of the same breaches over and over again. And it's my personal professional opinion, it's going to get worse. And it's going to plateau at that worst level for a while until we slowly start to get better. So some of the problems we have, this we've had this problem since the network's been invented. If you ask any engineer what's on the network right now, they probably don't know, right? And here is a screen of just some conversations that we saw on a pie chart. But some of the things that we can help with is, oh, what if I could break those conversations and tell you what kind of TLS encryption it was, or certificate information, right? And this is conversations in flight that were observed on the network, not necessarily, polling the device top down. Applications in use. Here we've got some peer-to-peer, which could be acceptable depending on your network, but probably not in most zero trust environments. You're not going to know if you don't look, right? Insecure protocols. Just about every security framework in the world tells you you shouldn't be running unencrypted protocols, but sometimes you just have to, but you have to know. So what I'm trying to get at is that pie chart with those IPs in the middle. Here's all the info that I was able to glean from it, from our network application metadata intelligence, right? So, and a number of expired certificates. A lot of zero trust is simply going to be good digital hygiene, right? And even today, that's proving to be difficult from an operational day-to-day standpoint. And again, I firmly believe that's because we're lacking a level of visibility into the telemetry of what's going on the network now. So what kind of information do we have in classic logging? Well, we've got the 5-tuple, right? Source, destination, protocol. Then came NetFlow, and NetFlow added maybe ingress interface, flow start time in bytes. And that was hugely useful. Now, I do want to point out that NetFlow's original use case was billing, right? And this kind of logging was withstood the test of time. Now, some of the things that Gigamon can offer with our network telemetry is this. We can see MAC addresses and DSP options. Why would you care about that? Well, if anything comes online, it's probably not going to lie about its MAC address. So we'll be able to identify what kind of device it is, or the manufacturer, at least, right? We've got protocol information, errors, retransmits, encryption levels, certificate information, application visibility and detection. And this is all important because you can't protect what you can't see. And if you have the most lockdown zero trust network and you control everything, what stops somebody from just walking over to a network jack and plugging their laptop in, right? And suddenly you've got rogue compute, and that has changed your vulnerability surface. So I like this particular picture because sometimes when there's problems, you go to the firewalls, the security logs, and that's not where the error happened, but that's where the information resides, right? So where do we start? And I'm going to actually be a little unorthodox here on where to start. Look at other risk frameworks that are actually in use in the private sector. I'm going to talk a bit about PCI, weirdly enough, because I consider PCI to be mini zero trust. It specifies a set of unique information or special information, in this case, credit card information. And then it says you need to look at your systems top down, bottom up, and see who has access to that information, who can touch it, where is it going, who, if somebody wanted to, could they traverse and try to talk to these devices? So that it's securing point of sale, it's securing data in transit, it's securing data in rest, except it's only talking about a credit card information. So how I would go about solving that is go into your organization and define a set of special data, whatever that may be for your organization, and then start auditing that data. Who and what has access, who and what is using it, where is it stored, should they be using it? And then kind of just slowly build out once you have that particular special set of data secured. And if you're looking for some tactical ways to do that, the PCI paper does have some recommendations. I've written another white paper on that. I believe it's only 14 pages. And PCI, from a technology standpoint, it's basically just good digital hygiene, right? No expired certificates, no rogue compute. You should limit how far these devices can talk on the network. You need to be aware of them, and then do periodic reporting to make sure that's still in alignment. So from that standpoint, it kind of is like a mini zero trust. So that's kind of how I would start with that. And again, we can greatly help with that because PCI is a lot of IoT, a lot of point of sale, right? A lot of minimally viable compute. That cash register running who knows what version of Windows, it hasn't been updated, or what Linux kernel. And then there's other things. When I was a network engineer, I found that there was more OT or IoT on the network than there were like laptops with EDR agents, right? You've got your badge readers, you've got your printers, you've got your thermostats. All of that's got an IP address. You've got your time clocks, right? And they're all running an operating system. What's securing those? What's watching those? Are you sure they're segmented? And that's kind of where we're starting with this bottom-up view of how to start to operationalize zero trust. I mean, it's great to lock this down, but you got to know it exists first. And that's usually a challenge. So cost. When the Navy was able to do this, we don't know what the cost was. I am personally of the opinion that cloud provided tools are too expensive, and it's going to be a challenge cost-wise to do if you want to do it in the public cloud. So we're going to have to find operational efficiencies. And that's something that we can help with. I do know that when some vendors come in and you need to, for example, say network defense and response in the cloud, right? It's eye-wateringly expensive with cloud-provided tools. And I know some of those vendors go, "Oh, I just quoted you a $10 million deal." Well, that's a complete non-starter, and like 9 million of that is cloud costs. And then they size that saying, "Oh, I've got this huge opportunity," when in actuality it was never really a way to go. So we, as a piece of interesting plumbing, we are a network telemetry solution with packet brokering features. We can help offset some of that costs. And we can help cross-pollinate some of those security devices, visibility appliances, and generate some of that metadata. Because again, you can't see where you don't sit. And this is something that we can really help with. And I'm not trying to, push Gigamon as a solution. I'm just trying to show that if you look at something, say like a next-gen firewall, and it solves for something, but when you start to try to put it in places where it starts to generate more friction, then the solution you get out of it, that starts to become cost, both in terms of engineering hours and dollars for with the licensing and the product cost. So we're going to have to refactor a lot of our tools because we're not just going to be able to push out, say firewalls everywhere or NDRs everywhere or EDRs everywhere, right? There's all some overlap that we're going to need to help deploy these kinds of solutions and to operationalize zero trust, because cost is going to be a factor. Another factor is logging. M2131, and then there's a new paper that dropped earlier this year from 15 security agencies, 9 nations. We're generally so immature right now in security, we don't even know where to log and what should be in a log, right? And M2131 basically says you will log from here. The logs will contain these entries, and you will hold it for a certain amount of time. Well, that runs into cost because logging in the cloud or other places can be expensive in terms of compute and storage. And there's solutions for that. That's definitely something we can help with as our network telemetry solution. We can log in lieu of those devices if they can't handle the load, or we can also turn some of that data into that logging into metadata, reducing its size significantly. And the cloud vendors, they charge you for logging for different levels. So sizing all this is going to be a challenge, and it's definitely something that we can help with. So in summary, zero trust is possible. Right. We've shown that for the first time, the Wright brothers have flown. Do I expect that solution to be viable in the coming days? No, but at least we've shown that it is possible. You're going to need a framework, right? I would suggest the DoD framework. If you may want to shop around for others depending on your needs, but that's the one that I recommend. You can always prune things out you don't need, but other solutions are very top-down EDR centric, or they're focused too much on a particular technology, and they overlook some things. And you need to understand what solutions do and don't do. And right, you need to have frank discussions with your vendors, and they need to be trusted advisors. I know it on paper it sounds like a great idea to put firewalls everywhere, but as someone who used to administer firewalls, and I'm both SourceFire and Palo certified, wow, that becomes high friction really fast. And you spend more time feeding and watering the system than actually getting something out of it, right? Once you scale beyond a certain size. So understand what they do and don't do. Start small, right? Just like PCI, select some set of special data in your network, and just figure out who's talking to it, what's talking to it, why are they talking to it, should they be talking to it, and start to design a solution around that. And once you've done one or two of those, you may be able to hopefully be easier to expand outward. It gives you kind of a framework to start with, right? And there's going to be a lot of efficiencies, a lot of evolution in these systems. Don't be afraid to get it wrong. We're all going to get it wrong, right? And then we're going to cross-pollinate, and someone's going to figure out a certain way to do something easier, and we're going to go that route. So just, it's going to get better, hopefully over time, especially now that we have won success with the U.S. Navy. So now we're going to turn it over to Q&A. Thank you very much for the session. I'm interested to see what questions we have.
Well, we have lots of great questions, Stephen. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We got into so many cool ideas, and I'm really excited to start discussing them a little bit with our audience. Stephen, I have to say, I really like both where you started and where you ended. I love the idea at the start, not asking one vendor to necessarily do it all, but more about being clear on what they do and don't do. I think that's a really important point.
And I mean, that's something I've seen a lot. Also, I've attended a couple seminars where they just didn't know what zero trust was, right? They got some of the acronyms wrong, or interpreted them in some way. And I did it too the first time around, right? When I was going through the framework. So, I mean, everybody wants to sell you something. But, when I was in operations, I really wanted to know, I want to be able to size the piece of the equipment or the solution right out the box, so I didn't have to spend time, figuring it out.
Well, and I think it's important to have conversations like this, because you're right. And especially when we're talking about something, zero trust isn't, as much as there are steps we can take, it isn't a checklist. It's an approach. It's a philosophy. And I think that does mean that conversations are really key, and really understanding, getting clarity. What do you mean when you say this? What do I mean when I say this? And are we kind of on the same page with that? And actually, I'm going to ask this question that just came in from Jeffrey, just because I'm curious what your answer is, Stephen. Jeffrey's wondering, is there partial trust? Is there like a halfway point, or is it kind of all or nothing in zero trust?
Well, I mean, the reality is it's going to be partial trust for quite some time, right? Because high maturity environments are going to be able to eventually pull this off. Anyone who's not high maturity is not, right? Because it's going to be cost. For example, when I was a network engineer in healthcare. They're going to want to try to protect their IoT as best they can, but that's not their specialty, right? And in healthcare is a great example, because you need a speed of operation necessarily over security. If you're in the emergency room, I can't have you log in with dual factor authentication, hop on one foot, approve it with your phone, right?
Yes, please don't.
To get it going. So there's a time component to some of these that are going to be specific to industries and verticals. And that's why I kind of went with a zero trust model. Designate what's special, right? And then leave the public side over there and try to wall it off as best you can.
That's interesting. And when you were talking about, sometimes we have a knee-jerk reaction and just start putting firewalls everywhere, or building walls, and I think that can start to feel like the right response. And that what popped into my head when you were talking about creating the system of feeding and watering was Little Shop of Horrors, and I was picturing Audrey 2, and this monster that you sort of create and then becomes this all time consuming thing. And I think there's a balance there with this idea of that where you ended of don't be afraid to get it wrong. I think starting with zero trust and allowing it to be a process and making it your own is why it's an approach, and it's what keeps it from becoming this knee-jerk response to just lock everything down, and then you're stuck with Audrey 2.
Well, and that's why you should have a framework and a plan, because if there is an incident and there is a knee-jerk response, you can at least try to map it, right, to that. Because I've seen a lot of organizations simply slap zero trust on their upgrades that they need to do because they can't get funding for it, but they can get funding for zero trust. So that doesn't really move the ball down the field.
Right. Okay. Well, I want to jump back to, we got a couple of questions that came in around the example that we were just kind of scratching the surface of, the Navy case study. And I'm wondering if I can ask you to talk to us a little bit more about what we actually know about the zero trust deployment in Azure. And you mentioned cost. We got a couple of questions about cost and why things are so expensive. So I'm going to ask you to kind of zoom in a little bit on that cost side of it as well.
So I don't know if I can put a link out there, but under the Microsoft Learning Challenge, learn.microsoft.com, there is a security zero trust strategy. And my assumption is that's kind of the feedback, that's kind of the framework that they used to deploy this. And Microsoft kind of did the same thing I did. They mapped their services and capabilities to particular sections of the framework and then explained where they were able to satisfy that. Now, they're using basically everything on the truck for their Microsoft, for the Azure services. That's not cheap, right? Logging's not free. Advanced logging is even more expensive. Having Sentinel and all of those things rolled out, I'd wonder what the cost is per workload per hour, right? It's got to be something eye-wateringly expensive. And I think for most organizations, it's going to end up being some kind of hybrid option, right? They're just not going to be able to, it's not going to be cost effective, right?
Well,
but
and
the ideas of it are necessary.
Yeah. By the way, I do have to say, I absolutely love whenever, and I've had cats in my life when I'm moderating that assume I'm speaking to them. So I appreciate that your cat feels that we're having a conversation with them right now.
That's my life. Yeah, she does that.
That's the zero trust expertise from Sir Meow-a-Lot.
Yeah, she's famous, internet famous.
Love it. You know what? I appreciate pets always in webinars. So hello, kitten, and thank you for joining us. I do, that cost thing, I think, and the question that came in was, so is hybrid the way then to keep costs down? Would you make that argument?
Here's my professional opinion on this. The public cloud will never be cheaper than the private cloud because the business use case will make sure it's always just a little bit more expensive, right? Because you can get it on demand, and if there's some kind of crazy outage or problem, you can immediately shift, and then they'll just bill you to the cows come home. So it's never going to be a more viable option, I think. However, most organizations already have existing infrastructure, right? And they're either migrating to the cloud, and some of them are migrating back and going with a hybrid model because of the cost, because they have the sunk cost. They've already spent money on all this gear. We may as well squeeze something out of it. And at the end of the day, I personally believe there's going to be a public cloud infrastructure attack. And that's just my opinion. I don't know when, don't know where, but we're seeing more and more infrastructure attacks. People are going after firewalls. People are going after routers. Eventually, they're going to try to go after the cloud infrastructure. So just having your assets spread around is potentially a good thing.
That's really great advice. And Stephen, I do want to mention, and I got distracted by our wonderful visitor, but I did post the link for that Microsoft reference point that you were offering to the team. So I have put that out publicly in our questions window there. So if anyone's looking for that link, you can find it there. We got a couple of questions in around, okay, is this best for government agencies? Also, is there any time that you wouldn't recommend zero trust? And I'm wondering, is there, a size organization or a complexity or something, an industry that you would suggest doesn't fit with zero trust? Or is this, short of, obviously it's not one size fits all in the sense that it's going to be the same for everyone, but as an approach, is this one size fits all?
No, definitely not one size fits all, because different industries have different demands, and sometimes there's a time component to that, right? Let's just take a factory, for example, and they've got pieces of equipment that are hot, or ovens that are going, or they've got, things in dough in the pipes, and they're making cookies or something. And if there's some kind of hiccup and that stuff stops, well, then you got to cut the pipes out, right, to get that stuff out and restart the factory. So,
right.
Yeah, there's and like, the emergency room example, right? We need time over security, and we need to eventually try to bake security and guardrails in. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a definitive list, but I could see cases where you would be less inclined to go full zero trust.
Okay, I have several questions vying for priority right now in my brain, because there's so many interesting ways we could take this. I'm going to start with this one here. You kind of mentioned this at the end. Don't be afraid to get it wrong and do something was sort of a key takeaway, like take a first step. You mentioned kind of starting by making that planning stage and picking the priorities. Where do you want to get started? Do you have any advice? We've got a question here about how agencies can start to prioritize which systems or which data to secure first. Where would you suggest starting, or how would you suggest deciding where to start?
Well, I mean, first you have to have an audit and know what you have, right? Are you aware of all the assets in your inventory, in your network, or in your organization? If you're not, start there, right? So you got a bottom-up approach. You know how many laptops, widgets, servers, workloads, machine accounts you have, right? And then the other side is to put top-down security. Start making sure you've got cloud security posture management. Make sure everyone's got check the dark web for everyone's logins or emails and see if they've been compromised. So it's definitely a multi-tiered approach, or a multidisciplined approach. So I would probably break up those 7 pillars, assign them to various orgs that align more closely with that, and then have them start going down that path while talking to the owners of the other pillars.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great place to get started, and I think everyone's taking notes on that. Let's talk a little bit about, we've been a little focused on some examples and case studies that have been US centric. We do have folks joining in from all over the world. Is there any difference in how the international community and folks abroad are approaching zero trust?
I believe like Australia and Singapore have their own model, which is closely aligned with CISA and the DoD model. I think it's generally understood. When I was in Amsterdam earlier this year at Cisco Live, there was a lot of interest in what the U.S. military was doing. Europe is now in an active state of conflict again after a long time, and they're taking it seriously. There's also the International M2131. I don't know if I can find that link. It's a very, very boring looking document that the 9 nations, 15 security agencies, NSA, FBI, Australian Signal Directive, Singapore, Japan, and other countries all came together. And it was basically start logging this way. Have your logs look like this. Have your logs contain this. And these are going to be gentle suggestions now. I expect them to become mandates later on. So we're not even in alignment as to what telemetry and information we're collecting, right, across organizations. So yeah, it's a thing.
It's a thing. I do have to say there is a small debate happening in our chat right now as to whether or not Gigamon is a Digimon or a Pokemon, and I don't know that I have an answer to that. I can tell you I now have the Digimon's theme song stuck in my head, so thank you all for that.
Why not both?
That's right. Both. That is clearly, we said at the start, you didn't have to be everything, but you had to be clear on what you are. So Stephen is clear.
Copyright for once.
Perfect. I think, you know what, Stephen, I wish we could keep going with this conversation, but I know we wanted to kind of keep things short and sweet and get everyone on about their days. So I'm going to start to wrap things up. Before we kind of go, though, I think you've given people some great sort of action steps and ways to take some of these more theoretical ideas and put them into practice in their organization. So I'd love to know if you have kind of a final thought or a key takeaway. If you could have everyone in the audience walking away really thinking about one thing, what would that be?
The internet and our technology world was never designed to run securely, right? It was designed to have a bias for uptime and resiliency. Well, now we've gotten to the point where, we have active state level threat actors, and it's, for the price of a fighter jet, a company can fund a whole group of people for multiple years, and they're actively looking. So security through obscurity is dead. And it was so complicated, no one will figure it out. Well, that's long gone. So there's nothing you can do if a state level threat actor wants to get you, but you need to make sure that you're a step ahead of the average cyber criminals. Make sure you've got a good security foundation. Make sure you've got decentralized passwords. You're not using the same password everywhere. There's good steps to take, and that's why I kind of pivoted back to the PCI, because PCI is just good digital hygiene, right? No expired certificates, no insecure protocols. And this is a challenge, especially for organizations that aren't necessarily technology minded. So,
well, I think, that's a great place to move forward from and kind of start taking a little action in everyone's days. Certainly, and what I want to reiterate is it starts with taking stock, right? And what I think you've really given everyone today are some great action steps for building that, where are we at phase of their planning and making sure that that's clear and then taking those next steps. Stephen, we have a bunch of handouts in the handouts tab right now. So there's a lot of ways that folks can dig in a little bit deeper, keep reading. We've got a couple of case studies, the DoD, the Department of Defense. We've also got that Australian National University getting that safer campus through Zero Trust. There's a couple of white papers, Zero Trust and the importance of network visibility, deep observability as foundation to Zero Trust, and then really digging into how Gigamon is supporting the Department of Defense Zero Trust 152 activities. This is actually a guide to managing cybersecurity risk within the Gigamon Deep Observability Pipeline. So if you want that step-by-step of what Gigamon can do, as Stephen was saying earlier, those are all there for you in the handouts tab. Stephen, is there anything that you would want to add about those handouts or sort of a next step to getting to know Gigamon that you want to throw out?
Well, the 152 controls, that's like the 29-page guide, where we step through, we use the exact verbiage from the Department of Defense, and then, we say their intent, we say what the outcome is, and then we say how we can do it. Or if we can't do it, it's not included in there. And that's the kind of boring read that the architects and the practitioners are going to have to go through. Maybe not through all of it, maybe just through their pillar. But you're going to have to grind it out, and it's going to suck.
See, this is the balance, right? You come to a really fun, cool, awesome webinar like this and listen to you speak, and then you got to do some really boring reading, and then you come back to a webinar and talk more with you, Stephen. It's give and take.
Yeah, and that's I'm glad I'm no longer in operations. Oh man, because that'd be murder.
Well, I do have to say, I've gone through a lot of your handouts, and for as dry as you're indicating, and yes, they are. That there's heavy information sometimes, but they're interesting documents, and what you can do with this documentation is pretty cool. So worth the read, worth the follow up. I hope you all make sure to download those handouts. Stephen, I am having such a blast, and I've really enjoyed chatting with you and your cat, both very welcome at the webinar. And I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been a ton of fun.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for everyone who attended.
And everyone out there who is asking questions, keep those questions coming in. I know that Stephen and I didn't get to all of them. We are going to make sure that those questions get sent on to the Gigamon team. So you will get responses back. So make sure you've got those questions coming in. Make sure you've clicked on all those handouts, download those handouts, take those with you. I promise you're going to want to read those later and share them with friends and family. Maybe you sit around the dinner table and talk about Zero Trust. I don't know. These days I do. So join in a lively family conversation with key homework pieces. All right. So before we take off today, we are going to do a prize giveaway. We have a $250 Amazon gift card that is going to someone here live and present at the webinar, and that that special lucky someone is David Steinmetz from California. David Steinmetz from California. Congratulations to you, David. As always, we will get in touch about claiming your prize after we wrap, and stay tuned for that best question gift card. We had some great questions coming in today. We will review all of those after we wrap. We will follow up with our winner. And like I said, I can still see questions trickling in. Keep those questions coming in. Again, we're going to make sure that these all get sent out. I also see that nice shout out, Chris. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed the session. I did as well. Adam says, go Callie. I love it. We got some good, strong, positive vibes today. This is a great crew here with us. Well, on that note, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Gigamon first and foremost for making this webinar possible. A giant thank you to Stephen for guiding us through such an interesting conversation. And I said at the top, I find Zero Trust really fascinating, and it's because of opportunities like this, where we get to talk about a little bit of philosophy, we get to talk a little bit about the operational models, we get to talk a little bit about technology and how humans are interacting with them. We get to talk about what is secure versus what is functional. All of these concepts kind of tied into this one big, somewhat chaotic but wonderful milieu of Zero Trust. And I want to thank all of you, especially for joining in that conversation, for asking some absolutely fabulous questions today. Gold stars to everybody. Everyone had their coffee today. I love it. And for helping bring that in-depth learning, because as we were talking about earlier, you need that blend, right? You read that report, you get that information, and then you come and you talk about it. And then you go talk to somebody else, you get some new ideas, and then you come back to the group and we all talk about it together. This is how we learn. This is how these programs and these ideas develop. And this is how we stay ahead of the threat actors, is by having informative, collaborative conversations like the one we had today. So thank you all for joining in. Thank you so much for being a part of our day. I hope that I get to see you all at a webinar again soon. And until then, have an absolutely beautiful end to your day. Thanks all.